Thank you, Jen. Our next speaker, Kelvin Teo, co-founder and group CEO of Funding Societies, a leading peer-to-peer lending platform that has been instrumental in empowering MSMEs across Southeast Asia. In Malaysia alone, MSME face a significant funding gap of about 90 billion ringgit, despite being the backbone of the economy, contributing about 40% of the country's GDP and 50% of total employment. With the mission to bridge this funding gap for a segment that is often overlooked by traditional banks, Kelvin hopes to make our societies a better place, hence the creation of Funding Societies in 2015 to provide accessible, transparent, and efficient financing solutions. Kelvin will take us on his journey with Funding Societies, where they have disbursed more than $3 billion to date to MSMEs across Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, Vietnam, and Thailand. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me in welcoming Kelvin Teo.
Hi everyone, I'm Kelvin, the co-founder of Funding Societies. We are a leading financing and payments platform for SMEs in Southeast Asia, having given out about $1 billion of loans last year. So after hearing a lot of big stats and numbers from all our previous speakers, as a Sunicorn, I thought I would differentiate ourselves by telling more stories, because of course founders are all competitive people, we try to outdo each other, right? So when Rahman and I started Funding Societies in 2015 at a dormitory of Harvard Business School, innovation was very different at that point in time. And this was one of the picture that was taken at our graduation. So that was 1 year after we started Funding Societies. And my classmates from other schools my classmates from other countries was like wondering, why is this Malaysian and Indonesian working so hard and dozing off at their own graduation? And we realized that innovation has changed, and why we have started Funding Societies at that point in time was really due to one talk. It was a talk given by Peter Thiel at Harvard when he was trying to sell his book, 0 to 1. And he made an interesting comment. Asia does not need innovation. Asia just needs execution. Because Asia is so far behind innovation, therefore all you need is to execute and catch up. And in 2015, unfortunately, that was true and was really annoying. So we took it upon ourselves to start Funding Societies. And at that time, you'll notice that most of the startups are clones. Hey, I'm the Netflix of Asia, I'm the Facebook of Asia, I'm the Uber of Asia, so on and so forth, right? But fast forward to today, you'll notice that innovation has changed, that startups in Southeast Asia is no longer clones. They are very much mutants. Hey, and the most obvious example is ride-sharing. So we have started off as a ride-sharing company, expanding into payments, and then subsequently deliveries. And even within Funding Societies ourselves, we started as a peer-to-peer financing platform, and before we started the company, we took the opportunity to visit all the major P2Ps in US and speak to the ones in UK, because as Harvard students, they kind of open up the doors and tell you everything that you want to know, right? And it helps us in terms of building our own business in Southeast Asia. But even then, 18 months after we launched Funding Societies, we've started evolving, pivoting beyond peer-to-peer financing because of a temporary change in regulations in Singapore. And we have continuously evolved ever since, including up to last year, whereby we acquired a Sequoia payments company called Kuala, so that to help us to expand our business from financing to payments business. So today we'll be talking about the hard things of innovation in Southeast Asia from a local founder's perspective. I think the first thing that we realize is that when it comes to innovation in Southeast Asia, it really entails a long game. It really entails a long game. So when Sequoia invested in us in 2016 upon our graduation, the partner was telling us and kind of hinting to us that, hey, Kelvin, based on statistics, a company becomes a unicorn within 7 years. A company becomes a unicorn within 7 years, based on their statistics. But when we look at Southeast Asia, the tech firm's gestation period oftentimes is much longer. If you look at Property Guru, it started in 2007, Tokopedia 2009, Garena and now C also started in 2009, and they only hit prominence around 2015 to 2018 or so, and they became listed just the last 18 months or so. So almost a 14, 15-year period in terms of gestation. And we often talk about market fragmentation, but the reality is that it does have a huge impact in terms of how fragmented and nascent a market, which causes more time taken for market education, more time taken to build distribution and regulatory clearance, and more time to wait for the customers to increase their willingness and ability to pay. So it really takes much longer, and therefore, I think compared to our US peers overseas, which have a relatively more homogeneous markets, be it in terms of US, China, India, or even Europe, the time to grow actually is a lot longer. So the question is that how much time? If you take a chapter from, say, Malcolm Gladwell's book Outlier, or even in just recent, the last lecture at Stanford class of 2023 that was given by the Alpine investor founder Graham Weaver, they indicated that, hey, to build true mastery in an industry or a space, it takes about 10 years. And in Chinese, there's a whole saying that 10年磨一剑, 10 years to sharpen one blade, right? So we think that there is some resemblance in terms of organization building. But we also, and of course, for investors that are present on the floor, you will be thinking that, hey, this is really painfully long. But what we also realize is that once you hit a tipping point of tipping point, you really build an iconic organization within the region. So one of the most memorable investor interviews that I had was with Yuri Milner from DST. So he's the founder of DST, and he's credited for breaking into Silicon Valley and became an early backer of Facebook, of Twitter, of Spotify, so on and so forth, right? And so it was in 2019, I flew to Hong Kong to meet him for 60 minutes. And the interview was really efficient. That after some pleasantries, it was just questions about the business, right? And they break it down mathematically about the business, just rip it apart piece by piece. Hey, what? Almost like an issue tree drivers. And within 20, 30 minutes, he knows all of the metrics, all the numbers of the company. And then it's followed by just knowing me as a person to the details of, hey, what do I eat? What time I sleep? What time do I wake up? And finally, I asked a really profound question that still got me thinking until today. So he asked me, Kelvin, what's the biggest bank in Southeast Asia? In 2019, it's DBS Bank, and it was worth $50 billion US. So the next question was that, how big is the SME franchise? So depending on whether you use which matrix, is about $10, $15 billion. Now, of course, DBS Bank is bigger. It has grown from 50 to 65 billion, right? And then he asked me a punchline question, right? That, so Kelvin, within 5 to 10 years, how far can you take? How far can you take? And it really got me thinking in terms of the horizon of thinking of the business, right? That, hey, if you're really focusing on a short-term regulatory change, this bleak market shock, so on and so forth, candidly, we can lose our sight very, very quickly. And because of the conversations, it has helped us to think about longer term and even power through the temporary blips that we experience very, very regularly. So in our view that when it comes to innovation in Southeast Asia, we really need to play the long game because it is what is realistic within Southeast Asia, having such a nascent and fragmented market. The second thing that we realized was that innovation in Southeast Asia really requires you to do it as a tribe, And that, in the Malaysian conceptual paper, we talk about how human capital and leadership is a cornerstone towards development. And we always talk about the talent shortage is a big issue, and I will not go into more details given that that topic has been beaten to death, right? But I think what is exacerbated in Southeast Asia is really that if you look at the US, one genius can really move the needle of the company, be it Steve Wozniak for Apple or even Alan Zhang, who created WeChat. But in Southeast Asia, very rarely can a CTO, CPO make such a difference. In fact, you almost need a tribe, and that tribe probably comes from many of the countries that you're present in Southeast Asia because it's so fragmented as a market. And therefore, we find that it's actually extremely important to build a tribe to even survive or to reach a certain level of scale in Southeast Asia. And that's particularly important in two ways. First, market shocks. Running startups in Southeast Asia is really, really turbulent. Really, really turbulent. If I just look at a map from Funding Society's perspective, in the last 8 years, we spent 3 years speaking to 5 different regulators, trying to getting license, securing license, and creating our own industry class. And in some countries, I need to speak to multiple ministries because everyone wants to have a say on that front. So out of 8 years, we have 3 years on regulations, another 3 years on COVID-19, which is the worst pandemic since 1918, the Spanish flu. And then we are going through a 1+ year of interest hike, which is, again, the highest interest rate in 22 years. So after 8 years, we have been going through 7 years of turbulence. And that's just macro shocks. Domestic shocks. Vietnam, first time you see a change of 3 Politburo members, and that, of course, caused a ton of government projects and subsequently downstream impact to the SMEs. Indonesia reduced its fuel subsidy, which of course again have a spillover effect to the SMEs. And finally, you see the Thai government being under the military rule for probably the longest time since it's starting. And all these changes obviously cause a huge ton of anxiety and uncertainty to team members. And how do you make sure that they stay and weather through this period of time? Is really to create a tribe together. So that's one, really a tribe necessary because it is what it takes to weather through market shocks. The second reason is really because of talent shocks, and that the key challenge is that we are probably the first generation of startups in Southeast Asia, first and a half generation of startups in Southeast Asia. Most of the people we have hired have not worked in a startup before. So how do they know they will enjoy or actually thrive in working in a startup? And what is worse is that, so we have spoken to tons of experts and we realized that we can only, even the best interview process, reference checks, whatever, you can only have a 50 to 60% success rate of hiring the right person. And why it's worse is that after you hire a person, it takes at least 3 months to know whether the person can work or not. In some roles like tech, it takes even longer, right? And it's also why we are always a bit suspicious about hiring executives or senior folks that have left the company for less than 2 years, because that's when the time you really know got results or not results, right? Or is it just fluff, right? And that also prompted a debate between Oriental and I, right? That as a data-driven person, to me, I always think that the person is innocent until proven guilty, right? That, hey, the person is performing until I really see that he screwed up, right? Whereas Reynard, as a more intuitive person, he thinks that, hey, if intuitively the person is bad, let's change. And that, unfortunately, over the last 8 years, it turns out that he's correct. And why is that the case? You may not be always right, but the reality is that a mishire can cause a 6 to 12 months damage. And if you think about for a startup cycle, we fundraise every 18 to 24 months. That 6 to 12 months is hugely damaging, right? You hire a new person and you don't even know the second person will deliver or not, right? So it's also why you see that we upgrade our leadership or middle leadership, about a third of them every 2 years, because it's important for us to keep upgrading. So, and it's only possible to keep the rest of the team together if you start building a tribe that is loyal to the cause, right? So the question is, what is a tribe? Or at least what is a tribe to us? Based on ChatGPT, the authoritative source, right, that it is defined as a group of people who have shared values and interests. And it's also why we really are grateful when Sequoia invested us in 2016. They gave us some not so good advice, but one very useful advice was that define your core values. Because people who are within my vicinity, my sphere of control, I can actually change them or influence them very quickly, right? But the ones further away that I do not interact on a day-to-day basis, all they see is what I stand from my core values perspective and how I practice them, right? So that has turned out to be very, very important in terms of bringing the people together. So therefore, and when we say tribe, I'm not referring to, hey, condoning poor performance and whatnot, right? At least in my mind is that if you're in part of a tribe, you should owe it to a tribe to contribute your fair share, and if you're not, you should reposition yourself. And it's also why our first CTO is still with us since 2015. Obviously, now he's not a CTO as the company becomes bigger. We have about 100 people in tech versus 5 when he was there, but he's still a VP of engineering. My first hire in 2015 is still with us. He used to be head of sales and marketing. And of course, usually following the Nike growth curve, right, that you have to step down to specialize in some areas. And now he's an acting CTO of Thailand, acting CEO of Thailand, as well as a commercial director for capital markets, right? And even for myself, last year alone, I took about 33 expert calls. Not me giving, me receiving, right? That, hey, this topic I'm not sure. Can I speak to someone in the US who have solved this before? Hey, that topic I'm not sure. 33 expert calls, which is approximately 3 calls a month, right? Excluding like December and whatnot. So really, we see that to drive innovation in Southeast Asia, to really weather through the different trends, market shocks, as well as the talent situation. The only way for you to do is to keep upgrading the team, and to upgrade the team means that you need to build a tribe so that the rest of the people are intact, rather than say, hey, one person leave and you're worried about it. Last is really feed the good leaders. I think Simon Sinek wrote a book called Leaders Eat Last. But what we find is that in Asian culture, we don't brag as much, we just do work and hope that people see it, right? And realize that oftentimes, if you are not careful, leaders don't even eat. Because you have let others eat first, right? And one example was in 2019, I met a startup that's pretty successful, and that it was started in 2012. And I was shocked to find out that after 7 years of being underpaid, below market, they've not sold a single dollar of shares. So the founders have not sold a single dollar of shares during the whole period of time, and the team did not sell a single dollar of shares during whole this period of time. I thought, like, dude, you're crazy. Do something about it. And good thing is that the next year they did a sale, and thankfully that he done it on time, such that the team was intact when they go through the tough COVID periods and so forth, right? And some people have said, hey, Kelvin, this point a bit self-serving, right? But this is really just pragmatic idealism, right? Or practical idealism, right? That if you're not feeding the team, candidly, how do they build a tribe? Like, people go into war with you because they think that there's meat at the end of the day, right? If they go into war with you and you didn't think that they'll be fed anything at the end of the day, who is still going to war with you, right? So this becomes very important in terms of growing the business. And that, when it comes to one critical example, when we think about, I lost my train of thoughts. As I pull out my cheat sheet in terms of the story that we'll be sharing. So when we look at some of the research that is done in the industry, I think Michael Freeman published a report that 72% of founders suffer some sort of mental issues or mental health issues. And that this has, and I'm perfectly fine, I'm at 28%. And that founders burnout is becoming an increasing rising cause of company failure. So the reality is that founders may start off not thinking that they need money. But soon they will feel that, because when if you run a long game, you'll start moving from being a single to getting married to having kids to taking care of aging parents, and you'll still be running and working at 2 a.m. every single day. In fact, I just took the first holiday in 8 years last week, right? And that the only way for you to continue sustaining is that you use money to exchange for time, hire a helper, give private tuition. So it's really using money to give a peace of mind. So, hey, sending your children to private tuitions and whatnot, or to good schools, or even spending for travel for parents while they are still healthy and running, right? So it's really important that we start thinking about it, because otherwise, a lot of the team members or senior members will actually get burned out quite quickly. I think one may also say that, hey, why do we need to feed? Like, hey, investors should lead first, right? Because investors are putting hard capital there. And that if the company is successful, hey, the founders will be earning a lot. But the reality is that after going through 8 years, we have been very fortunate to outlive many of our competitors and become the market leader. And I look at some of our peers in the market, actually for founders or even leadership team of companies that are not successful, it's really, really painful. Imagine yourself working in extreme hours, and that going through a lot of stress and uncertainty. And in this market, the uncertainty is just at a different level, right? If investors are worried, think about founders whose 100% of their life, their youth, sometimes their health are all put into a company, right? At least you are diversified, right? How much stress level it is, right? So I think to that extent, making sure that team members are sufficiently fed during that period of time is very important, because the ones who actually ultimately fail, it can be in a very, very difficult state. And that if more and more people see that, hey, if you work so hard, 90% of the chance you'll be at that state, or worse still, the company does not die, so you can't start anew, but you are still faithful to your team, for your tribe, and therefore you're just chugging along for years, right? Wouldn't that be even worse, right? So at least in my mind is that for us to drive innovation within Southeast Asia, we need a critical mass of talent, especially in a market that's already short of talent. And the only way is that to keep feeding good leaders. Of course, not any random leaders. Of course, not just giving money for free and not tracking periodic milestones, right? But really feeding the good leaders along the way. These are some of the realities checked. Candidly, the hard things of innovation is copied from hard things from Ben Horowitz, right? But this is unfortunately, in the last 4 years, I've actually experienced all the hard things that was said by Ben Horowitz, right? That be in terms of laying off when the big goals are missed, be in terms of superstars developing a sense of entitlement, therefore I need to transition them out, be in terms of building a right org structure, but reality is that what speaks between the informal org structure is what really matters. And finally, dreaming big and only realizing that it's turning into a nightmare and you have to fix it, right? So, this hopefully sheds some light in terms of investors of how some of the founders are thinking within the market. I think finally, I think the last point for the benefit of funding societies is that I think humans always have a very love-hate relationship with money. They say that the love of money is the root of all of evils, right? But at the same time, money is almost necessary for social mobility, for business development, for innovation. It's also why funding societies have spent the last 8 years working on the hard things in Southeast Asia to not just empower SMEs to grow, not just Mamak store to grow bigger, but hopefully with our regional footprint and with our expansion into payments, enable them to be in the internationally competitive business across the region. And it's also why we are, and the hope is that this will indirectly cause GDP growth, employment growth, and ultimately development bargain. And it's also why we call ourselves funding societies. Thanks a lot, everyone.